April 1st, 1945. Haegshi Beaches, Okinawa. You are standing knee-deep on a spit of coral and sand. Wind slicing salt into your mouth. The Pacific a hard, gunmetal sheet under a low, angry sky. Foam and the staccato of surf camouflage the low mechanical cough that is getting louder, not landing craft. Not just LVTs. But steel shapes moving where steel should not move. Men around you are shouting. But their voices are lost in the scream of turbines and the slap of waves against armored hulls. Corporal James Jimmy Albright of Company A, 712th Tank Battalion, has his feet braced against the deck of LCT-98. The deck trembling under his boots. He tastes diesel and fear. In front of him, 3 Sherman tanks hunch like beasts with paper lungs, canvas skirts rolled tight around their flanks. Framed by hoops and rubber tubes. A pair of propellers stare from each stern like extra jaws. On the turret, Staff Sergeant William Will Hargrove squints through salt-stung eyes at the spit of land that intelligence maps had promised would be impassable, a network of shallow streams, mangrove channels and coral-fringed inlets that the defending Japanese believed would be natural moats. We launch on my mark, Hargrove says. Voice thin over the engine din. He feels the vibration through the soles of his boots. He knows the skirt will hold if the sea is kind. The tank's crew, driver, loader, gunner, are hunched inside. The metal belly of the Sherman sealed and strange. Waiting for the moment when canvas will lift it from death into flotation, across the water. On the bluff above a narrow channel, Lieutenant Noboru Sato of the Imperial Japanese Army rests his binoculars on his helmet like an old habit. He has been told that the Americans cannot bring armor across these channels without bridges or pontoon gangs. Rivers and tidal flats are defensive sorcery here, natural barriers the Imperial Army has depended upon since early in the war. He watches the American landing craft off the point and allows himself a bitter, private smile. Machine gunners are shifting into position, mortars are being laid. He can see the LVTs. The Higgins boats. The usual ugly procession of the invasion. The idea of a tank swimming the shallows like some man-made crocodile is something he has read about in dispatches from Europe, a curiosity. A novelty for the channel crossings, not a tool of island warfare. He will be about to see what novelty means when it is used against you. From the LCT the Shermans are eased into the water. The beaching plan calls for armored support as soon as infantry can establish a foothold inside the surf line. The skirts, a duplex drive-style flotation screen in concept. And on some Pacific operations fitted with pressed steel pontoons or T6 flotation devices, are hoisted in a slow, methodical ritual. Air compressors hiss, rubber tubes take shape like bellows. The tank commander's hand sweeps the deck as if blessing a fragile raft. Then the props bite the water and the Sherman moves, not with the wheeze of a tracked vehicle on sand but with a slow, determined swimming gait. It is an uncanny sight, familiar silhouettes of turrets, machine gun barrels, radio aerials, making their way across the tide like islands with tanks on them, for the men on the shore. And for Lieutenant Sato, that sight collapses a belief. Rivers, channels, tidal flats, the natural obstacles that had been counted on to slow or stop an armored advance, are no longer absolutes. The enemy has borrowed the sea's cloak. Somewhere between the line of surf and the mangrove mouth, Hargrove's Sherman finds the channel and does not stop. The driver jigs the tiller, the propellers keep the bow up. When the mud and reeds of the inlet press against the canvas and the tank settles, the crew collapses the skirt and the Sherman's tracks begin to eat into what the Japanese believed was safe ground. Infantrymen, soaked, filthy, and trembling, watch a hulking machine climb from the water and turn its 75mm gun to the bluffs where rifles had been sighted. This is not just machinery, it is a psychological weapon. The men under Sato's command, dug into redoubts behind mangroves and culverts, had prepared to repel any armored thrust at road bridges and fords. They had counted on channels to break American momentum, to funnel attackers into kill zones. Instead, an iron formation is moving where only canoes, and the occasional landing barge, were expected. Sato's mouth tightens. He has trained against tanks, but not against sea-stepping tanks that treat water as merely another surface on which to fight. A mortar salvo comes in, men topple and the smell of cordite blooms. Hargrove's Sherman lurches forward under fire. The 75mm twisting and firing into foxholes and banyan roots in a slow, inexorable rhythm. Where a bridge might once have been necessary, there is now a ramp made of canvas and steel. A temporary and dangerous miracle that allows crewmen to cross places once thought impassable. Around the channel, Japanese defenders shift their aim, searching the horizon for the next unexpected movement. The beach becomes a place where old assumptions drown. Background, duplex drive flotation screens were a British development adapted for Shermans and other tanks. And in the Pacific Theater the US sometimes employed alternative flotation systems such as the T6 device for amphibious crossings. Amphibious kits and improvised pontoons were employed to move armor across shallow water obstacles during island operations. The water churns brown and red behind the treads as Hargrove's Sherman grinds up onto the mangrove flats. Branches snap against the hull, the engine coughs and roars. Mud streaming down the sides. The tank's radio crackles to life. Able Company has landed. Repeat. Tanks ashore, and over the surf's crash comes a cheer from the soaked infantry crawling along the waterline. To them, it feels as if a mountain has decided to fight for them. Lieutenant Sato can barely comprehend what he's seeing. Through his binoculars, the massive shapes, first 1, then 3, then 5, are emerging from the water like spirits. Their hulls are smeared with seaweed. The remnants of the flotation skirts dragging behind them like tattered sails. They are not supposed to be there. He had trusted the barrier, the channels and soft coral beds that, in every exercise, stopped vehicles cold. The sea was supposed to protect them. Yet the sea itself has betrayed him. The Japanese mortar crew nearest the bluff panics, firing short and wide. The air is filled with screams, both commands and terror. A gunner shouts that the tanks must have been ferried across by some hidden bridge. Another insists they are floating fortresses. Perhaps a new American superweapon. Sato knows it's none of those things. But he cannot deny the impossible. Tanks that swim. Hargrove ducks back into the turret and wipes his brow with an oil-slicked sleeve. Loader. He shall target those trees. The gunner aligns the sights. And the 75mm roars again. The shell lands in the tree line with a muffled thump, sending a geyser of dirt and splinters skyward. Good hit. Move us up 30. The commander barks. The driver throttles forward. The tracks hissing as they grind over coral and roots. Behind them, more amphibious Shermans, DD tanks, as the engineers call them, are advancing through the surf, guided by the white helmets of Navy beachmasters waving flags. Some of the tanks list badly. Skirts torn or half deflated. But most make it. Their emergence shocks even the Americans on the beach. No one expected the experiment to work this well under Pacific conditions. The current is stronger here, the water deeper, the coral sharper. Yet the tanks swim on, slow but relentless. By 0830 hours, a dozen Shermans have crossed the tidal barrier and are fanning out on the flat behind the mangroves. They form a rough line of battle, turrets pivoting, their coaxial machine guns raking the ridge. Japanese snipers hidden in palm trunks are flushed out by the thunder of .30 caliber fire. The assault, which had been expected to bog down for hours at the channel, now surges inland in minutes, to the infantry advancing through the reeds. The sound of those engines is like the heartbeat of salvation. They move in the tank's wake, crouching behind them as living shields, firing short bursts into the underbrush. Marines shout to each other. They said no tanks could make it across. Guess nobody told the Shermans. Further inland, Sato stumbles into his command post. A rough dug bunker lined with bamboo and sandbags. Maps are scattered on a crate. His sergeant looks up with a pale face. "Sir. They're crossing everywhere. The channels mean nothing." Sato grips the edge of the table. His knuckles white. "Then we fight as if we have no channels." He mutters. "Call the Type 147mm crew, set up on the inner road. If the water cannot stop them, we will." But the 47mm guns, dragged into position by sweating men and mules, are already too late. When the first round slams into a Sherman's side, it bounces with a shriek of steel on steel. The tank replies with a single shell that tears the gun crew apart. The defenders' faith in their terrain evaporates. Through the haze, the smell of burning oil mixes with seawater and mangrove rot. The tide keeps rolling in. But it brings not safety. Only more American machines. One after another, the amphibious tanks crawl from the ocean, disgorging death in disciplined, methodical arcs of fire. By noon, the beachhead that was expected to be a nightmare of delay is instead a brutal success. The amphibious armor has transformed what the Japanese believed to be a natural fortress into a flat plain of opportunity. The defenders' trenches are half flooded, their flanking fire cut off by a wall of iron. Lieutenant Sato, crouched in the smoke near a broken mortar tube, watches the last of his men retreat into the trees. He lowers his rifle slowly. The sound of the American engines fades into the distance, not rumbling over a bridge, but churning through the shallows. Rewriting every law of the battlefield he had trusted, he whispers, almost to himself. The ocean is theirs now. By the afternoon of April 1st, the coastline of Okinawa has become an industrial symphony, the rhythmic pounding of naval guns offshore, the low, guttural churn of tank engines, and the high, mechanical clatter of machine guns cutting through air thick with brine and smoke. Waves slap against steel hulls half submerged in the shallows. The sand trembles under every tread. Corporal Jimmy Albright leans out of the Sherman's commander hatch, squinting through a smear of oil on his goggles. The tank's skirt has been half ripped away, trailing behind like a ghostly cape. "We made it, boys," he mutters, his voice raw from shouting orders and sea spray. "They said we'd sink like anvils. Guess we float better than we look." Inside the cramped hull, the loader, Private Wallace, a kid barely 20, laughs nervously. "Float in coffins. They called em," he says. "He'll take that over dying on the beach." The tank lurches again as it climbs out of a shallow ravine, mud sluicing off its sides. To their left, another DD Sherman has stalled, its propeller is mangled, its skirt torn. A crewman is waist deep in the surf, hammering at the pontoon frame with a wrench, determined to drag the machine free before the next wave of artillery hits. On the horizon, dark plumes mark the pounding of destroyer guns suppressing enemy positions further inland. In a command tent aboard an LST anchored offshore, Colonel Richard W. Rothschild, commander of the 713th Tank Battalion, listens to the static-laced reports coming through the radio net. Each call sign, Able, Baker, Charlie, marks another improbable success. Every tank that swam ashore is rewriting the doctrine of amphibious assault. "Tell Division HQ," Rothschild says. "The DD tanks are performing beyond expectation. The Japanese defenses along the channel are collapsing." He pauses, rubbing the fatigue from his eyes. "They thought nature would fight for them. Now it's fighting for us." On the ridge overlooking the beach, Lieutenant Sato watches through the haze. His binoculars are cracked, one lens spidered from a nearby explosion. The smell of burning oil has become inescapable, heavy, sweet, and choking. He sees an American tank pivot, its turret sweeping slowly toward what used to be a strong point. A burst of machine gun fire silences the spot forever. Sato feels something inside him shift, not fear, but a cold understanding. The Empire's engineers had built concrete bunkers to resist bombardment, had laid mines to stall landing craft. But no one prepared for the enemy to simply swim their armor ashore. These Shermans are not just machines, they are the embodiment of an industrial will so immense it has begun to make the ocean itself obey. The few surviving defenders rally where they can. A 75mm mountain gun is dragged into position behind a limestone outcrop. The gun crew fires. Once. Twice, the shells streak across the water and explode uselessly short. The Americans return fire with terrifying precision. One shell from Hargrove's tank hits the gun position dead on, sending a spray of sand and limbs into the air. By dusk, the sun burns through the mist in a bloody smear, turning the flooded fields into mirrors of flame. Smoke from burning palm huts and fuel dumps rises in slow, black ribbons. Amphibious Shermans crawl through the shallows like prehistoric beasts returning to land after millennia in the deep. Their crews are exhausted, deafened, their uniforms stiff with salt and oil. But their momentum doesn't stop. Each yard of beach claimed is a step closer to the island's heart, for the Japanese soldiers retreating inland. The stories begin to spread, whispers passed between foxholes. The Americans have tanks that swim. Tanks that come from the sea itself. To them, it feels like fighting ghosts. Enemies who emerge from the waves in armor no tide can drown. Sato gathers what's left of his platoon in a small ravine. We fight tonight, he tells them quietly. But understand this, they are no longer bound by the earth. If the sea cannot hold them, neither can our defenses. He does not know if his men hear him. Most are staring out toward the coast, where glowing shapes still move through the twilight, the silhouettes of machines that defy reason. Far behind the front, on a U.S. transport ship, a young war correspondent scribbles in his notebook by the light of a flickering lamp. His line reads, "Today, the ocean ceased to be a barrier. It became an ally." He pauses, listening to the thunder rolling in from shore, and adds, almost as an afterthought, "And somewhere out there, an enemy officer must be wondering what other miracles the Americans have built." Night falls on Okinawa like a closing fist, the kind of darkness that swallows horizon and sky together, broken only by tracer fire and the orange bloom of distant explosions. The surf glows faintly where phosphorus rounds have struck the shallows. The wreckage of broken pontoons and the skeletons of LVTs lie half submerged. Creaking with the tide, Corporal Jimmy Albright's tank sits half hidden behind a low dune. The crew has been ordered to hold position until dawn. Inside the hull, the air is thick and foul. The engine's heat turns the steel walls into an oven. But no one complains. They are alive. Outside, muffled by distance, the last of the day's fighting fades into intermittent rifle bursts. Albright checks his sidearm, then climbs out of the hatch. The wind slaps his face with the smell of burning vegetation and sea water. He can see the flickering lights of other Shermans scattered along the coast, a constellation of iron fireflies marking where the amphibious assault has succeeded. They said it couldn't be done, he murmurs, staring toward the Black Sea that carried them here. Guess they were wrong. Inland, Lieutenant Noboru Sato moves through the ruins of his command post with a lantern. The bunker is half collapsed, sand and debris coating everything in a thin, choking dust. His men, what remains of them, are silent. He kneels beside the map crate, brushes away dirt, and studies the hand-drawn lines that once represented the island's natural defenses, rivers, channels, coral inlets. All meaningless now. A corporal approaches him hesitantly. "Lieutenant, the sea is rising with the tide again. If they attack with the morning light, they will." Sato cuts him off gently. His voice is calm, almost detached. "They have made a weapon of the sea. What defense can we have against that?" He extinguishes the lantern and listens to the wind. Somewhere far off, a diesel engine coughs, sputters, and settles into a steady growl. It is the sound of inevitability. Dawn on April 2nd arrives pale and merciless. Low clouds hug the island, and from the east the sun turns the water into molten steel. The first amphibious Shermans begin to move again, their treads grinding against wet coral. Infantrymen follow behind, whispering jokes through cracked lips, the kind of gallows humor soldiers use to keep from trembling. Colonel Rothschild steps out onto the deck of his command LST and raises binoculars to his eyes. The scene unfolding below is everything the planners had dared only to imagine: armor advancing inland through terrain once thought impassable. "Gentlemen," he says to the officers gathered behind him, "the concept works. The duplex drive isn't just a European trick anymore. For military historians in the making, though no one here can know it yet, this moment will become the proof that innovation, when wed to desperation, can bend the very elements of nature." Sato's remaining troops open fire from the tree line. But their bullets spark harmlessly off armor plated in salt and grit. The Shermans return fire, their 75mm guns thundering with methodical patience. Palm trees explode into showers of splinters. The mangroves that once concealed the Japanese defense now serve as markers for American artillery. The psychological toll is worse than the shells themselves. Survivors later recall the horror not just of tanks appearing where no tanks should be, but of realizing that every piece of terrain they had trusted could now betray them. For weeks, the Japanese army had prepared to meet the Americans with static defenses. They had believed that geography itself was a fortress: cliffs, reefs, channels. But on Okinawa, nature changed sides. The amphibious tanks had crossed the boundaries between land and sea, between machine and environment. Late in the afternoon, Hargrove's tank rolls past the ruins of a coastal bunker. Smoke curls from its gun ports, a tattered flag droops from a splintered pole. Albright leans from the hatch, scanning the shoreline one last time. "Hard to believe we swam that," he says quietly. Hargrove nods. "Harder to believe they didn't think we could." Behind them, the tide rolls in again, gentle, indifferent, erasing footprints and shell craters alike. The Pacific has always taken what it's given. But today, it has given the Americans victory. In the weeks that follow, reports circulate through Imperial Army channels, exaggerated, panicked accounts of ghost tanks that move like boats, of armored divisions that rise from the sea. Engineers in Tokyo demand details, blueprints, anything that could explain what was witnessed. But for those who saw it firsthand, no explanation is necessary. They had already seen the impossible. For the Americans, the lesson is clear: there are no natural barriers anymore. Rivers, reefs, and oceans can be crossed not by bridge or ferry, but by ingenuity. The duplex drive Sherman, that ungainly machine of canvas and steel, had not only conquered the water, it had conquered disbelief itself. As night falls again on Okinawa, the waves lap gently at the mangroves where so many had fallen. The sound is soft, almost peaceful. Somewhere beyond the surf, an American tank crew sleeps inside their floating steel shell. And Lieutenant Sato, alone in the jungle, watches the moon shimmer on the sea that no longer protects him. The Pacific War has changed forever.